So, last year was a pretty interesting year in the NBA. We finally got to see Ben Simmons come back, the world was introduced to LaVar Ball, and perhaps the craziest of all, we got to experience the offseason. An offseason in which there are 4 trades. 4 trades that, to put it simply, changed the NBA, shifted its landscape to the point where no other offseason could be seen the same ever again. It's evolved into a place where the stars have all the leverage, and not the teams. At least 3 out of the 4 trades that I'm going to talk about today were driven primarily due to the players' desires, and not the teams. This led to what people saw often as bad trades, and we'd see writers grade these trades. Now that we have a whole season of hindsight behind us, we're able to look back at these grades and these trades and reevaluate them. And we'll be able to see if a bad trade that really looked to be bad isn't actually, and if a good trade actually was not the greatest. So let's just get started.
Player 1.
So it's draft day, right? 2017, June. The Magic just used the 6th pick to select Jonathan Isaac, and now the Timberwolves have the 7th. And people are expecting them to choose like Malik Monk or Dennis Smith Jr. or even Larry Markkinen. So we're waiting for the trade to happen, right? And then out of nowhere we see a trade proposal by the Bulls, where basically the Bulls get Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and the pick that the Timberwolves were just about to use. Okay, then who the Wolves get in for the return? Jimmy Butler? So naturally, no one really thought that this was going to be a good trade. As you can see from the grades, the Timberwolves look like they just straight fleeced the Bulls. I mean, Minnesota got a top 10 player to go along Cat and Andrew Wiggins for a guy who tore his ACL, a guy who averaged like 4 points in his rookie season, and only dropping 9 spots in the draft. And from the Bulls' perspective, I guess you could reason it as, okay, they've been wanting to trade Jimmy Butler and get past the Tom Thibodeau era for a while now, and start rebuilding. But for a top 10 player who had 2 years left on his contract, it seemed like they would at least get the Nets pick from the Celtics. And the Timberwolves, they basically got off scotch-free. I mean, the only real negative was maybe chemistry issues with Wiggins, seeing as they played the same position, and, accelerating the timeline to a point where it might be uncomfortable. But other than that, really nothing. Now with hindsight, we can see that the defense really didn't improve like expected with Jimmy Butler and Tom Thibodeau on the team. However, the offense did get boosted quite significantly, to the point where it's like a top 5 offense in the league. But the stunted defensive growth of Cat and Wiggins sort of soured the deal a little bit, but other than that, was a very, very good trade, and is honestly really exactly what the Timberwolves were looking for. For the Bulls, on the other hand, Larry Markkinen turned out to be a very good player, top 5 Rookie of the Year candidate, due to the little, Mirotic Porter incident that they had. And Dunn is coming to his own as a player already. At 24 years old, he's averaging some 13 and 7, I do believe. And LaVine hasn't lost that much of his scoring ability. He's lost a little bit of balance with his ACL tear. But with a 3 with Dunn, Markkinen, and LaVine, that seems to be a very nice young core. And with a top 5 pick on the way, this team could be very good in a few years. So I'm going to bump that standard D all the way up to a B. And the Timberwolves, they get an A because they got exactly what they wished for.
Player 2.
So after that, the NBA world was sort of put on edge. After a blockbuster trade like that had happened, what else was going to occur? Of course, the Rockets were in contention for some really powerful free agency moves, and all of a sudden, roughly a week later, we do start seeing some movement, the shuffling around of players with the Rockets roster. And out of the blue, we see it. Chris Paul is involved in a sign and trade that sends Patrick Beverley, Sam Dekker, Montrezl Harrell, DeAndre Liggins, Darren Hillard, Lou Williams, and Kyle Wiltjer, plus the 2018 Houston first-round pick, to the Clippers, while the Rockets receive Chris Richard Paul. I don't know his middle name. So the Rockets looked like they were doing good with the deal. They were on the upper hand and stuff, which of course is because they got a top 10 point guard of all time. And then they mixed that with the should have been 2-time MVP. It was honestly the perfect situation. The worst thing about it was that they weren't able to get rid of Ryan Anderson, to be honest. And of course there are the naysayers that said that, Chris Paul likes to control the game. He likes mid-range jumpers. D'Antoni and Morey, they don't like mid-range jumpers. Someone's gonna give in. It's gonna be bad. And let me just move on. And of course, for the Clippers, they were able to get at least a little bit of value from instead of him just walking in free agency. But of course, they traded a bunch of role players for Chris, possibly Richard Paul. That's not the greatest thing to do, especially when your best asset was either Lou Williams or Patrick Beverley. Now with that hindsight, you can see that the grades really don't change that much. The Rockets, of course, are at an A+ because they clinched the Western Conference with the #1 record in the NBA at 65 wins. So it ended with an MVP for Harden and the best record in the league. And most importantly, a chance to beat the Warriors and get to the finals. Of course, the Clippers, they decided to completely retool after a mediocre record with Blake Griffin after signing him to that super big extension. So the record really doesn't reflect anything, to be honest, at this point. Lou Williams was the most valuable asset, 22.6 points a game as a sixth man. Gonna win Sixth Man of the Year without a doubt. Second time, I do believe. And Montrezl Harrell, a 24-year-old, is coming into his own. I believe he averaged 10 points a game. And he's becoming promising with his post moves and his relentless style of play. Naturally, injuries to Patrick Beverley and Gallinari held this team back. And yeah, they're gonna lean on the lottery with their 2 picks that they now have. They honestly did the best they could in that situation. I give props to the Clippers front office for making the best out of a terrible situation.
Player 3.
So after the Chris Paul sweepstakes, everyone, and I do mean everyone on the NBA world, was on edge. Paul George said that he did not want to re-sign with the Pacers and that he'd prefer to go to LA, according to rumors. And so everyone's in a frenzy. People were thinking that he'd go to the Cavs, the Lakers, the Celtics. And then, boom, out of nowhere, Paul George is traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder, of all places, for Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. Now, the initial reaction to this trade was very, very negative. It just seemed like the Thunder had just pulled off one of the best trades in NBA history. I mean, they got a top 10 to 15 player to side along Russ, who needed help desperately after that triple-double MVP season. And for a guy who scored 15 points a game, plus an unestablished rookie. Of course, the main negative, though, was that he was on a 1-year rental, and of course it put pressure on OKC to be title or bust. As for the Pacers, it just seemed like, they got rid of him, like the DeMarcus Cousins incident, or the Chris Paul incident that was just shortly before. And of course, it just seemed like a terrible trade in the Pacers' part, where they're getting offered the Nets pick, good young players, but instead they literally exchanged him for Oladipo and Sabonis. Both players that were pretty unproven and pretty unspectacular. Now, however, it's a completely different story. The Thunder trade, which looked like a complete steal at the time, one of the best trades in NBA history, sort of collapsed in on itself. The OK3 tandem just couldn't bring it together. Throughout the whole season, we as fans were hopeful that it would eventually click, that this team would start performing well. We could see it in big games such as those against the Warriors. So even when the regular season goes past and they still haven't clicked, we believe that this battle-tested team, they were more experienced than the Jazz. And that's not how it turned out. They were beat in 6 games. Carmelo Anthony, if he opts into his contract, will officially be the most overpaid player in the NBA. At $28 million and 33 years old, roughly, he'll be haunting the Thunder for years to come. With Paul George possibly leaving next season, the fact that this self-destructive so disappointingly is not a good look. The Pacers, on the other hand, were the polar opposites of the Thunder. Seen as a lottery team at the beginning of the season, this team, with Victor Oladipo emerging as an MVP candidate and Domantas Sabonis being a solid starter, averaging over 10 points a game for them, this team almost won 50 games and took the Cavaliers to 7. The same team that took the #1 seed in the East in just 4 games. With so much youth and connectivity, it's very likely that next season they're going to be true contenders in the East. So for that, I'm going to have to give the Pacers an A+, and the Thunder, they receive a B-.
Player 4.
For a while, it was seen that the Paul George or the Chris Paul trade was the craziest trade in the offseason. Then, Kyrie Irving was requesting for a trade, as he wanted to be the man, and he felt like he couldn't do that under the shadow of LeBron. So, of course, there's a bunch of speculation to whether or not he would go to the Heat, the Suns, the Spurs even, teams of the like. Then, out of nowhere, the Celtics come up and trade him for Isaiah Thomas, Ante Zizic, Jay Crowder, and the 2018 Nets pick. This trade caught everyone off guard. For one, the Cavaliers were trading their second best player to their Eastern Conference rival, and they were also getting an injured player in return. Despite how surprising it seemed, it was still a pretty good trade in many people's eyes, including mine. The Cavaliers were able to pull an MVP candidate, a staunch defender in Jay Crowder, and what seemed to be a top 3 pick at the time. And the Celtics, they got one of the most promising players in the league, and they were able to keep their young core that included Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I covered the details more extensively in one of my previous videos. I'll probably put the I thing right there. So if you want to really see me going in depth about it, you can go over there. But the main problem, of course, with Isaiah Thomas was that he's a defensive liability. And also his hips, the thing that no one really thought would be such a big deal, but obviously it would come back to bite them later. And for the Celtics, it sort of felt like they gave too much for one player, as IT was seen as a similar offensive player talent-wise, and they had to give up Jay Crowder, one of the best two-way players, plus the next pick. After holding on to these picks and these assets for so long, it felt underwhelming. Of course, now that completely changed. The Cavaliers were still able to limp their way into the finals. They went ahead and got swept by the Golden State Warriors. A part of that is due to the IT experiment completely combusting, as IT never came back the same after his hip had been injured, and Jay Crowder was terribly disappointing. And really the only thing that keeps this from being a whole D is the Nets pick that actually came up 8th instead of top 3, and the assets they were able to pull for IT. Even that wasn't the greatest, as could be seen by their subpar playoff performances. And the Celtics completely won this trade now without a doubt in my mind. Kyrie went out and led the Celtics without Gordon Hayward to a 2nd seed in the East, while being able to keep the young core of Tatum, Brown, Rozier, and Smart. Next year, we're going to see a 5-man lineup of Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Al Horford, with possibly Marcus Smart and Terry Rozier off the bench. And if that doesn't sound like a top 3 NBA team, or maybe even the best team in the league, I don't know. So I'm going to have to give the Cavs a C, maybe even a C- for the subpar finals performances and all around in the playoffs and the weakness that they've shown, and the state this team's going to be in after LeBron is gone. And I'm going to have to give the Celtics an A+, as they're going to be one of the premier NBA teams in 2019, if not the top. So there you have it, the offseason trade grades then and now. Some stuff didn't change, a lot of stuff did, and overall I'm hoping that I can make this video next year. So anyway, thanks y'all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.